Welcome to Forbidden Planet TV. I'm Andrew Sumner. I'm very pleased today to be joined by the one and only Bret Easton Ellis, right here to talk about his latest novel. How have you been, Bret?
I've been great. How are you, Andrew?
I'm very well, thank you, brother. Very well indeed. I'm very pleased that I'm getting the opportunity to talk to you about another novel. Your
Yes,
first in about 12 years or so, right?
yes, it is. It is. It's been a long time.
And what can you and this? Correct me if I'm wrong, but the Shards sits more on the metafictional perhaps side of what you've done. I mean, I felt there's a bit of a through line with your Luna Park approach, for example. What can you tell me about the novel and how it came to be?
Well, it's a novel that I've actually been thinking about for a long time. I actually conceived of this novel the year that it's set. I conceived it in 1981, and I wanted to write it in 1981, 1982 when I was a senior in my high school class. That's where the idea came. And the Shards, published, this year, last week or whatever, really is in many ways the book that I first thought about in high school, about a group of high school kids, and really narrated by a boy who wants to be a writer and has a writerly imagination. He's a bit of a fabulist. And part of the problem and what the Shards is really about is how you control this kind of superpower you have as a young man. And there is, at least for me, a problem with it, a danger with it, because it can get out of control and you can rewrite the world to what you want and what you wish and what you hope, even if that's not true. And you begin seeing people in a different light and you begin imagining things are really happening when they're not. And all of that kind of conspired in the Shards. And I just couldn't figure out a way to write it for the past 40 years until the pandemic, the lockdown happened. And it was the second month, I guess, of the lockdown. And I started looking up old classmates online. I hadn't talked to them in 40 years, but I couldn't find them. And then I couldn't find the places that we all hung out together that senior in high school. The clubs, the restaurants, the coffee shops, the movie theaters, they were all gone, disappeared. And they hadn't been curated. No one was taking thousands of pictures of these places. So anyway, this all kind of conspired into going back to the novel and writing that novel from 40 years ago. But the key difference is from a 56, 57-year-old man. He's the narrator of the novel looking back at those events. And for some reason, that opened the door. And the book really kind of effortlessly, after so many tries at writing it, finally happened.
What is your process for putting together a novel like this together? I mean, how much is spent in the planning of it, the assembly, and how much in the actual delivery of the manuscript?
It's been, I have always depended upon an outline that is really in many ways a first draft. My outlines are usually quite long. I remember the outline for American Psycho, I spent a year on, because I knew that there really wasn't a story in American Psycho. It was just sort of Patrick Bateman, and I was interested in capturing his madness on the page. What would that look like stylistically? How do you portray madness on the page? And so I went through many iterations of trying to figure out his voice, and that was about a year. And of course, Glamorama, a very big book of mine that took me 8 years to complete, very few people have read. I spent a year and a half on that outline, just outlining the entire movements. Even something like Imperial Bedrooms, my shortest book, I really depend on outlines. Well, for this book, it just suddenly dropped into my lap one night. I said, oh, okay, after looking up those classmates and listening to some Ultravox and Flock of Seagulls and the bands from our senior year, Blondie, Devo, whatever.
Let me just ask, what era of Ultravox?
1980, I would think of Vienna. Vienna
Yeah.
is a song that is constantly referenced in the book. And so that night, when I was, thinking about my classmates and thinking about that year, and I wanted to somehow make amends in a way because I acted rather badly, I feel, all these years later, I wrote 3 pages suddenly like that. And then the next day I wrote 14. And then it just happened. And then I stopped and said, okay, what were the movements of this book? Okay, so it opens the first day of school. No, so it opens the Labor Day, first day of school, party, the Galleria scene, chase them intro. And so I wrote it all down, but just like on a piece of scrap paper, 2 pages. And that was my outline because I had it in my head the whole time. So there really wasn't that much of an outline for the Shards. And the writing process, when you have a book going, and I've said this before, it is bliss. It is sheer happiness to have a book, to go to a book every day and have that waiting for you. I love it. I mean, I don't have the, oh God, dreading getting up and going and looking at the white page of a screen. Just that's it's a friend. It's a really good friend, a lover. A
Yeah.
lover sometimes. So I'm very happy when I'm writing a book, and I stick to a schedule. I stick to a kind of like, I don't know, 11 in the morning to about 7 at night, and that's my writing schedule. And so for this book, it took about, I don't know, a year and a half to write.
Yeah. And that's it. That's very interesting to me. Something you mentioned in passing was the fact that when you went back to these places from your memory, that they hadn't been curated. And it would seem to me, as a frequent visitor to the US, that the US is essentially split into two kinds of city, although this is a hugely reductive statement I'm about to make. Two kinds of city: those which eat themselves, and those which in some way like respect and honor their history. I'm thinking about places that it seems to me like Vegas, like Los Angeles. It's very difficult to get a sense of even 20th century history in these places because, if you go back 10, 20 years after you've initially been, they've changed completely. Is that how you found it was, looking back into that era in your life?
Well, I think everyone is different, and everyone has a different relationship with the cities that they grew up in. Yes, part of the strangeness, in a way, I guess, for some people, is that LA is a very, very modern city, maybe the last of the big modern cities, not really beginning to be developed until the 1920s. I mean, that's quite unusual. I mean, LA was a desert before it was, modified into what it was. So it's a very young city. And but at the same time, I wasn't so concerned or confused or distracted by the brevity of its history. I just loved the freedom the city gave a teenager. Now, I had my own problems with LA, and I had my own kind of ennui, my own adolescent angst that I kind of painted the city with at times. And certainly my first novel, Less Than Zero, is about that. But at the same time, and what I really didn't write about so much then, was the freedom the city offered. The vastness of it was unbelievable. And it was so crazy that you could go to the beach, and within an hour, you could go to the top of the mountains where there would be snow. And within an hour and a half, you could be out to the desert. I mean, it just offered this kind of spread that was kind of magnificent as a child. And it really imposed this sense of freedom on you. And being mobile, having that car. It wasn't New York. I mean, my friends who grew up in New York and my friends who grew up in LA, very different childhoods and adolescence. And my adolescence, all I remember is the freedom of it all, the freedom that LA offered. But yes, you're right, I suppose. I mean, some cities just don't have that kind of, that backbone, I guess, the kind of traditions that an old city might have, and that might be imposed upon its citizens to a degree. There is a sense of, with that freedom and with the vast sprawl of Los Angeles, there is a kind of wandering, lostness, I suppose, to a degree. But otherwise, when now looking back on it, I'm very grateful that I grew up out here.
Yeah, okay, that's very interesting. And another thing that you touched upon, and something I wanted to ask you about, was there's the through line that music has always had throughout your writing, throughout your works. And I used to be a music magazine publisher here in the UK. In fact, I used to work on some of the magazines that back in the day we used to interview you quite a bit, The Enemy and Uncut and whatnot. And over here in the UK, certainly, the music press, I think, were among some of the earliest adopters of your work. And part of that was triggered by your insights into and your writing about music. So, what was the source of that for you? And how has music always, as clearly always stayed with you? But what's the urge? Where does the spark come from to include it so heavily in your writing?
Well, it has to come from my childhood. I had fairly young parents, and they were really into rock music, the pop music of the 60s, the 70s, and music was just a continuous backdrop in my childhood, whether it was in my parents' cars where they were driving us places or playing throughout the house. So and also you have to understand that as a child at that time, AM radio was huge, and we were listening to everything from Elton John to Steely Dan to Stevie Wonder to whatever was the Beatles, of course. And so I just remember a constantly being enveloped in music. I even began to take piano lessons at a young age when I was like, I think 5 or 6, and I continued until I was 16. So I was always immersed. I was in bands in high school. I was in actually one band in high school, a couple bands in college. So I was just, and the music was great. The music was fantastic, and I wrote songs, and I was a songwriter. So music had always been a part of my life, just as it had been a part of the lives of the characters that I write about. I don't know how you could write about a person like Clay in Less Than Zero and not have him referencing the songs that are playing. And the same thing with the Kids and Rules of Attraction all the way through American Psycho. I remember, however, when I was doing this at university, when I was in my first writing workshops, and I would mention what song was playing on the radio or what people were listening to, or a brief conversation between two people about a band or a concert they wanted to see. And my writing instructor, my first one, stopped me and said, "You can't do that. What, you're dating this. You're dating your story, and you're going to end up on the ash heap of literature if you keep using all these brand names and mentioning what movie is playing and what songs people are listening to." But it felt authentic, and it felt authentic to the lives of these people, and that's why and it is. It is. I could not have written the Shards without all of that music playing. And I think if you go to Spotify, someone made a Shards playlist, and it's like 7 hours long.
That's
And it's
wonderful.
glorious. It's
Yeah.
glorious. There's some stuff on that playlist that's not in the book. They've added some other songs, but more or less, there's like, over 100 songs in the Shards, and or reference, or they're being played and so. So anyway,
We'll link to that at the base of this conversation. That's wonderful. Do you listen to music while you write? I mean, I've heard from a lot of people have said, I've talked to over the years, said when they're writing, they can only listen to instrumental for obvious reasons. But do you do that? Do you work in silence?
I work in silence. Yeah, I don't. I mean, I
Interesting.
used to listen to music when I was younger. I could concentrate on both. I could have music playing and I could write. And then as I got older and older and older, that kind of just stopped happening. So no, I don't listen to music when I write. I mostly listen to music because I drive a lot in LA. I listen to a lot of music in my car, and I still prefer compact discs. I have a fetish for them. I love them. I love the jewel cases. I love the discs themselves. So I usually purchase a CD because I like, whatever. The whole package of it all is something that I like. And so I listen to compact discs in my car.
I love that. Yeah, it's the tactile journey of the compact disc, and
Analog is
yeah,
kind of it is analog, even though it seems so new and digital in a way, but it's analog. It's seriously analog.
can you remember the first CD that you bought, Brett?
Uh, God, I was a big vinyl guy, and so I resisted CDs for a long time. I like to buy records. And so I did not buy my first CD until they'd been out for 3 or 4 years. And then I started to have to replace my vinyl
Yeah.
collection and all that. But you know what? I actually don't remember the first CD I bought. That's a good question. I don't know what it was. No.
It is interesting. Those transitional moments on many things are often so blurred, aren't they? Because it's like the transition from color black and white to color TV, or it's everything that's a medium hop. It's sometimes difficult to think, oh, that was the ground zero. That was the moment.
Whenever they came out, I did not buy a CD, I believe, until like 1993 or 94,
Yeah.
and I don't know what it was.
I'm gonna have a think. I'm gonna try. I think I'm gonna go out and see what I think was the most likely thing, and then one day get to check whether it's right.
The most likely thing was probably an old record that had been released on CD. I am
Yeah.
sure that was it. I just don't know what it was.
Bret, can I ask you about the metafictional aspect of your work? What is it that? How did that come about, and how did that become a creative choice that you've made now and again in the novels you've produced?
Well, look, to be honest, and I have said this before. This is part of the problem in interviews, but just to
Of
be clear,
course, yeah, you get the same questions all the time. I get it.
no. Someone asked me why I hadn't written a memoir, and I said I have. I've written 9 of them. They're all published. Started with Less Than Zero. Now we have the Shards. The books are a reflection of where I am, no matter who the narrator is. And often all the time, they're about where I am emotionally, what confusion I'm going through, the pain I'm going through. And the pain is very different in my mid-40s than it was when I was 18 or when I was 25. The pain kind of evolves and changes, and you become confused by different things. And that's what writing always was for me, was an outlet, a way to heal myself. For some reason, that medium, the novel, was where I went to figure things out, and a novel came out of that all the time. That's how it happened. That's how it happened with the Shards. And and all my narrators have been men who are basically my age when I wrote the book. So they are, in a way, all kind of, no matter how outlandish the plots are, or how high the body count is, they are still kind of where I am at any given moment. And when I got to Lunar Park, which is really, that and the Shards are the 2 times where I just said, screw it. I mean, I'm really writing about me right now. Just throw in Bret Ellis for Lunar Park. And I really thought that was the only time I did it. And that was more of a mock memoir. It was kind of, it was a it was a haunted house book about a writer. I was influenced by Stephen King. For this book, I mean, it's not even intellectualized or overthought. I just started writing, and I realized I'm writing about my life. I mean, at least at first, in the first hundreds of pages or so, about my life. Why would I call him Alex or Jason? It's Bret. It's you. You're writing about yourself, even though you're writing yourself into this much larger fictionalized world. And it just felt right. It felt like something I had to do. It wasn't it wasn't some sort of overcomplicated choice, and I wasn't trying to say anything by doing it. It just was like, oh yeah, this is Bret.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. What are you hoping people will take away from the Shards?
Well, if you see the dedication, the book is for no one.
Well, yeah.
So I'm not hoping anything. I'm not hoping that anyone takes the place. I write the book for myself, and I was giving a talk last night here in Los Angeles, and so that came up, and this notion of, what do you hope a reader gets from something? Well, I'm not thinking about the reader when I'm working on the book. The reader is me. And the book is about me, and I'm working out a lot of personal things between myself and the story, who this character is, what the style of the book is. And then it's done. And then, okay, well, here we go through this process. A publisher wants it. It will be edited. It will be produced into this thing. And then, and then it will be reviewed, and you will give interviews, and you will do a book tour, and all of this stuff will happen. But really, once that final sentence is written, I'm done. Yeah. I'm done. It goes out into the world, and it does whatever it does. Some books are paid more attention to. Other books you think would be more popular are not. It's just, it's so random. And I guess what you hope is that a reader will be transported into another world and lose themselves pleasurably for hours and hours on end. That's what I want from a novel. I want to lose myself, and I want to, I want to be put in the shoes of another person.
Yeah.
I want to know how another person lives.
Yeah, I think that's extremely well said. When you look back on the breadth of your novels that you've written so far, are there any with which you are particularly fond? How do you feel about them all as a piece? Are the ones that jump out at you?
I can't bear any of them. I can't bear any of them. I can't look at any of them. I'll open one up and I immediately want to take a pen and change some stuff. Well, for a long time, my least favorite was American Psycho, of course, because it was the most popular, is
Of
the
course,
most
yeah.
popular. And so, of course, I'm suspicious of that novel because I thought when I wrote it, when I finished it, my publisher hated it and it was dropped. And I really thought 5,000 people were going to ever read the damn thing. And then I'd move on to something, I guess, more, I don't know, commercial, maybe more people would read it. And that didn't happen, of course. So, and then, but now American Psycho is fine. I mean, I say I can't bear them. I just don't want to look at them and I don't want to reread them. But a book that I kind of did have problems with was my last novel, which was Imperial Bedrooms, an LA set kind of neo noir set in Hollywood about a screenwriter kind of losing his mind. That was extremely personal. I was going through an extremely painful period in my life, the midlife crisis, you might call it. And yet I went to this book every night after dealing with this horrible movie situation I was involved in and whatever was going on in my life. And for a couple of hours every night, that was kind of a therapy. It was kind of this thing I went to heal myself, to exorcise all these negative feelings I was having about the industry and where my life had landed and what I was doing and why was I involved in the Hollywood, in the movie industry. And by the time I finished it, and it's a very short book, it's 160 pages, took me 3 years to get through. I kind of didn't really care anymore. I didn't really think much of it. Now, I picked it up about 3 years ago, and I was shocked at how much I liked it. Something had changed. Years had passed, and I know a lot of people don't like that book, but I couldn't believe how spare it was, how every word was just screwed into place. It had this kind of haiku feeling to it, and the pain was just radiates off the page. It is in many ways a very ghastly book. I mean, horrible, horrible things happen in it that again, I did not personally, take part of, but it was a reflection of my disgust at the time about not only myself, but what I was doing in this business and all that stuff. So if I had to answer, I would say that. And I also liked that essay collection I published about 4 years ago, White, which
Yeah,
was a
right.
cultural look at Gen X. That was obviously because of the heated moment we were in, mistaken as a political book when in fact it was a book about the culture.
Yeah. Did he take any backlash on White?
I've taken backlash on everything.
Yeah.
The backlash on American Psycho was radioactive compared to White. I lost 30 publishers with American Psycho. I was told I was never going to be published again. I was told I didn't get a job as writing anything as a journalist for a year. It was whatever. It was all silly, but that was radioactive. White was just like wherever we are in the culture, all this noise and din and people screaming at you and everything. No, the backlash. Oh, I'm sure there is. I mean, I'm sure that there. I mean, I could see the backlash. I mean, it was happening in huge waves, which was expected. I guess you publish a book like that in that moment, and that's going to happen. But I don't know. I've never really been. It doesn't. You don't really feel it once you've been canceled in quotations by a publisher and by all your other publishers for a book, and you are the worst reviewed writer of your generation. I am the worst reviewed writer. You can see it now. There are lots of pans, there are lots of good reviews. It's always 5-star, 1-star, 5-star, 1-star. And you go onto Amazon anywhere. And so being that worst reviewed writer of a generation, Backlash, what's a backlash? I don't know. Does it mean that I'm not going to win any awards, which I've never been nominated for? Probably, yeah. Will I ever really be accepted by the mainstream press? Well, probably not. Life goes on.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And before we go, Brett, there are three things I specifically wanted to ask
Yes.
you about: the Shards itself, which we've talked about, and Imperial Bedrooms, which we've talked about, which I love, by the way. I loved it from the get go. I'm not you, of course, and I have a very different perspective, but
Good.
I love that book.
Yeah.
And then my team, all of whom are like slasher movie, horror movie nerds, massively wanted to me to ask you about smiley face killers and how that came to be.
It's so funny. I've written great scripts that will never be made. They're dead projects. Great scripts, serious themes, hugely dramatic, parts where actors or actresses could win Oscars if they ever made these scripts. Those don't get made. Those just don't get made. They're impossible to get made. You come close, they fall apart. I've had a couple movies made from scripts of mine that I just tossed off. Horror movies get made. So I've had a couple horror movies. I did a web series that was kind of a horror-like thing. My partner, I had a production partner. We're no longer producing partners anymore. We started a production company, and we were trying to figure out what is the surest way to get the production company off the ground, get a movie made, and have it make some money. Horror film, cheap, easy to make relatively, and the profit seems much more potentially higher than any other genre. Okay, so what are we going to write? Write a script, we'll produce it, we'll get it made. And so I became interested in this article my producing partner sent me about this phenomenon in the United States across mostly the eastern seaboard and where there are large bodies of water, where it seems between September and May, an unusual amount of young college men drown. And that was interesting. Well, why is that happening? Well, they get drunk and they wander off to the woods, or they go swimming or whatever. And there were, however, a few of these guys, because there was, and we're talking about 100 deaths. We're talking about drowning deaths are very common, but there was something happened. The sister, I think, of one of these guys one year got a phone call from her brother who was screaming, "They're after me, they're after me." And then he disappeared, and then his body was found in a body of water about 3 or 4 days later. Okay. Creepy. And I kind of started reading more and more and more into these cases where these two detectives were hired, and they were hired by the parents of a boy who had drowned, and they put together this narrative. They had taken pictures at 100 sites where boys had drowned, and they noticed that at each site where the body probably went into the water, because the bodies, when they were discovered, were at another place because of the movements of the currents and all that stuff. They noticed that there were what looked like these smiley face paintings on a dock or a wharf or a rock. And oh, you just started something. These guys started something, and it became a bit of an industry about 10 years ago or so. There were smiley face books, there was a smiley face documentary. Who knows? This notion that the boys were abducted and that they were tortured for some reason and then purposely drowned as some kind of cult or sacrificial thing, whatever. A serial killer was on the loose. It's kind of been debunked, but it sparked something in me, and I wrote a script taking off on that idea. And so that's how it happened. The script was really turned out really well. A lot of directors were interested in it. I thought I was at one point going to direct it, and then that kind of fell apart. Tim Hunter came on board to direct it. And the problem with the movie, even though I like it, and cinematography is stunning. Michael Pessa really was the co-cinematographer. I watched some of it about 2 or 3 months ago. Looked fantastic. The color correction was just gorgeous. We didn't have enough money. We did not have enough money to fully do a couple of big set pieces, and we did need to reshoot some stuff that we didn't have time to do. So the movie to me feels a little half completed in a way, and a little bit more minimalist than the script originally suggested. But for the most part, I like it, and I I just wish that we had more money and more time to make the version of the movie that was in my script.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I get that. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting how often that happens, right? And how often that
It happens
is,
all the time.
yeah, is a real piece of
It's a
feedback.
miracle if a movie comes out as well as you even half think.
Did you enjoy working with Tim Hunter?
Well, the problem was that by that time, my producing partner and I, we weren't really speaking.
Right. Yeah.
And I got a note from him saying, "Hey, remember Smiley Face?" Well, no, actually, from my agent. It wasn't from my producer. My agent said they're making Smiley Face, and they want to know how much you want for it. I mean, how much they're gonna buy the script. And so I said, well, I got to be a producer on it as well. And so I guess I had forfeited directing it whenever our partnership dissolved, but we were brought back together. He was very keen on Tim Hunter. I was not. I was not keen on Tim Hunter, and for various reasons that proved to be true. I know Tim now. I like Tim. I'm not sure he was the right person to direct that, and I think he might even admit that as well. I think it was
Uh,
a moment. I think it was a moment in his life where perhaps he needed work and he was being offered something. But I don't know if that was. And I know he liked the script. I know he very much liked the script. But I think that Tim really wasn't interested in horror movies, and there was a lot of post production, a lot of editing work, back and forth, so many different versions of the movie, and he was off the project by then, so
yeah.
he really did not have any kind of say in the editing. I think that left him a little confused, but I liked him. I
Yeah.
just don't think he might have been the right person to do that. Or maybe he was. I don't know. There could have been someone who didn't do it as well as Tim, or who did it a lot better. I don't know.
That is fascinating. I remember reading you say once a couple of years ago, maybe it was even longer ago than that, because it's a long time ago now, that your favourite adaptation of your novels, although films, novels, intrinsically a very different thing, was The Rules of Attraction. Does that still hold true to this day?
Oh, completely. Yeah,
Yeah.
completely. It does. It's I don't know how it really just depends on, of course, it depends on the mix of people and how passionate they are about something you've written. I think part of the problem with something like The Informers, which was a movie based on a book of short stories I wrote, was that the people involved just didn't really have the passion for those stories, and they thought it would be a Bret Easton Ellis type American Psycho like thing, and then it just collapsed because I don't believe the people who made it were that passionate about it. Roger Avery loved the book The Rules of Attraction, and he, in a way, because of that, he did it a kind of justice, and he was there. The book had impacted him in such a way that he went and he captured the spirit of the book, which is really all a writer can hope for, because you can't film the book. You shouldn't film the book. A book is different from a movie. I don't write a book to be a movie. I write movie scripts. They're movies. Books are books. Books are about consciousness and style. Movies are really about structure and storytelling. So and so that's why that movie works so well. And I do, people keep saying that I diss American Psycho, that I don't like that adaptation. That's really not true. I think that's a kind of, at times, rather smashing adaptation of the book. It's just that the book is like something I lived with for 3 years, and it's
Yeah.
all about consciousness to me. It's not really about what the movie is about. And being a movie has to answer questions that a book can leave ambiguous, just because of the very nature of film itself. It's all there. It's all there. So you see someone killing someone, it's not a dream, they're actually doing it. And I think Mary Harron has said this in interviews that she kind of blew the ending a little bit because people were sort of overly confused about, well, did he do it? Did he not do it? In a novel, it can work really well and you can be kind of spooked by it, by the unreliability of a narrator. But it's very hard to have an unreliable narrator in film. It's just very hard by the very nature of the medium. So, but anyway, so yes, I would say props to Roger Avary for doing The Rules of Attraction. And I was so happy with that I sold Roger Avary his second favorite novel of mine, Glamorama, which he still owns the rights to. I should have done a different deal for that and maybe done an option. But he was so high and he was so high on making Glamorama, and he had already written a couple of terrific scripts. And then stuff intervened and
I so wish he'd got the chance to do that. I wish Avary had been more for whatever reason he hasn't been. I wish he'd been more prolific as a director, because I've always found his work very interesting.
Yeah, well, he did make a movie a couple of years ago, which barely got released. He had a lot of personal problems. A lot of real life intervened, and he was kind of sidetracked for many, many years. And it is too bad because he's only, I think, shot 3 films, and he's enormously talented.
Yeah, I think I couldn't agree more. I think that's very well said. Bret, thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate talking about the Shards, which everybody watching this conversation can order from the links attached to this conversation. Bret, what's next for you, mate?
Well, I don't know what's next. I mean, there's a movie I want to direct. There's a TV series that I'm very interested in, that I have been somewhat hired to work on. Was very taken with Quentin Tarantino's Cinema Speculation.
I love that book. I think I couldn't agree more.
I loved it. And I've had Quentin on my podcast a couple of times. I'm somewhat social with him. And that really confirmed that I want to do a book like that. I want to do my version of Cinema Speculation. We're the same age. We grew up in the same area. And I completely related to everything. I knew those movies. I knew those B-movie exploitation films that you can't even find now. I went to a theater to see them. I would be writing about a very different kind of movie, a different kind of movie experience. And the key moments for me from the 70s into the early 80s, that would be the period I cover, much like he does, but it'd be a completely different list of films. It would be very different. And I want to do that. Not that there'd be not movie reviews, but just the experience that these movies had on my life, what my life was like at that point, and why those movies were so impactful to me. I don't know if, unlike Quentin, I don't know if a publisher wants to spend the money on a book like that. They might not. We'll see. I'd probably write it first. And then see. I wouldn't take an advance and do that yet. But I'm thinking about that. And then there was also, I wrote a book during, I don't know, I think it was 2017, 2018. I kind of a genre exercise, sort of a spy thriller, very short, maybe 180, 200 pages, like the first in a series. I had planned 10 of them, and it was really fun to do. It came out of nowhere. But the narrator is a girl. And I mentioned it to a couple of people, and they said, no, you can't do that now. You can't have a man writing in the voice of a woman, which is really part of what's so terrible about the culture right now. But that's for a whole other interview, and I'm going to leave it at that. But so there are things percolating, and we'll see. We'll just see where everything lands.
Thanks for sharing that. It's all very interesting. I certainly hope you get to the chance to do the cinema essays versus your life book, which would be fantastic.
Hopefully that's next.
And is it true that Tarantino was interested in doing another adaptation of Less Than Zero for a while?
I had heard that. We have never spoken about that. All I know is that he really liked that book. He didn't like what happened to the movie. And there have been rumors I had heard, and I don't know why I've never asked him this, if that was true, that was one of his long lost projects. But I had heard it enough from people because I didn't meet Tarantino until, I don't know, 2015, 2016, about the time The Hateful Eight came out. I didn't know him before that. If this was true or not. I'll have to ask him next time.
Yeah, right. That's just right for your podcast, surely.
Yeah.
Hey, Bret, thanks for your time, mate. I really appreciate it. The Shards, I'm so pleased that you're back on the bookshelves, back on our bookshelves, and everybody watching this again can order the Shards from the links underneath our conversation. It's lovely to meet you, mate.
Thank you very much. Have a nice day. Have a nice rest of your night.
I certainly will. Take care, mate. All the best.
Okay. All right.
Cheerio.
See you later.
If you're enjoying watching Forbidden Planet TV and you're enjoying watching us talk to the world's most interesting and accomplished filmmakers, authors, artists, musicians, creators, subscribe right here. See you soon.